further ado, I am gonna turn off my mic and stop my video and turn it all over to Kirk.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. And I am just gambling like on all Zoom calls that everybody can see me and hear me. So I'm just going to go ahead. A little bit about me there. I got 12 to 9 hives, depending on the weather. I'm considered a hobbyist beekeeper. When people ask me what it's like to be a beekeeper, I just tell them to go into the bathroom and start flushing $100 bills down the toilet as fast as you can while your wife sticks you with hot needles. So you don't plan to make any money, but you can have a lot of fun. So when I give this talk, I like to start out by asking everybody to help participate in a little thought experiment before we talk about bees themselves. So I'd like for you to imagine a city of about 30 to 40,000 people. Every citizen in this city has a job. There's no unemployment. Every citizen's job contributes to the well-being of everybody. And if one citizen or one segment of citizens fail, then that threatens all other citizens in the community. The city has a real-time communication system. This system relays up to the minute accurate internal and external conditions to all citizens. All citizens are wired in. There's never an internet failure. There's never a miscommunication. If corrective action is needed, all citizens who need to act immediately. The city makes its own food and building materials and pharmaceuticals. It only uses three ingredients, outside ingredients, and water. The city's food supply and logistics system ensure the food will remain viable for many years. Food is available when there's a shortage of raw materials or when the raw materials are not available at all. No one will go hungry. There's no crime in the city. However, outside forces are continually seeking to rob the city of its resources. So the city has an organized militia that can deal with small incursions. However, when there is a mass threat, all of the citizens are mobilized and come to defend the city. The city has a thermal regulation infrastructure that operates 24/7, 365 days a year. This mechanism keeps the city air clean for all citizens. The same group regulates temperature even when it's extremely cold or extremely hot. The temperature must be regulated for the city to operate correctly. The city is always clean. Sanitation crews continually work to remove garbage. They remove debris as well as the remains of citizens who have passed away inside the city. Sometimes the sanitation crews run across a very large, immovable dump of garbage that threatens the health. In this case, the sanitation crews will cover this dump with an airtight antimicrobial substance that keeps the city healthy and keeps pestilence out away from the citizens. Sooner or later, the city, if it's successful, will become overpopulated. When this happens, citizen volunteer pioneers will leave the city to establish another city. The site of the new city will only be finalized by a unanimous vote of citizen representatives. This is a very complex process, but it takes a unanimous vote. Last but not least, there is not a single leader of the city. There is no politics. There are no elections. There are no disputes. There's no one citizen group that is more powerful than another. There are only total citizen interdependency and altruism that keeps the city going. So if you can imagine a city like this, then you've just treated yourself to a glimpse of what a honeybee superorganism looks like, because all of these functions are contained in the superorganism. So there are a lot of definitions of a superorganism, but what they all have in common are that the individuals cooperate and there is a high level altruism in the colony. Examples of the honeybee altruism: there's only one reproducing female. All other females forgo any sort of reproduction. Members die unflinchingly to protect the superorganism when it's under threat. Members take on dangerous nutrient gathering tasks to ensure the food supply is adequate. There are many more examples of altruism, but these are a couple to give you an idea. So what I want to talk about today is just take a brief look at honeybees in North America, the biological imperatives of the superorganism. These are the things that are immutable, part of the honeybee's biology and physiology. The seasons of the superorganisms, the process, a few of the most important processes inside the organism, and then hopefully have time for some questions. So the honeybee in North America, I'm sure you've all seen honeybees and wasps, but here are a couple of the differentiating characteristics. A couple that worth mentioning is a honeybee has a barbed stinger. When a honeybee stings you or another mammal, it dies. The stinger stays in the target. There's a pump of venom that keeps pumping when it's pulled out of the target. Wasps, on the other hand, and yellow jackets, they're just mean. They sting as many times as they want to. They're very aggressive. Of course, the shape of the bees and the wasps are different. Pollen is one of the major foods of the honeybees. So honeybees and bees and all bees have some sort of mechanism to carry pollen back to the hive. And you'll see some pictures. The honeybee in particular has pollen baskets on her upper rear leg. And it's, I think one of beekeeping's greatest pleasures is to watch bees come back to the hive with pollen. The wasp and yellow jackets are predators. Some wasps do eat pollen and nectar, but they all will hunt honeybees and other insects to feed themselves and their young. So honeybees are not native to North America. If you like honey, then you think an immigrant. Honeybees were brought when immigrants came to America. They brought their bees with them or sent for them soon after. The Germans sent for bees to pollinate their apple crops, and the Spanish brought bees, as did the English. So one result is we have a lot of subspecies of bees, honeybees in the United States today. So this is most of the honeybees that you see really came from Western Europe, and I'll point it out here on the map. In this area, we have Italians. Most of the honeybees that you see out will probably be Italian. They'll have a tan abdomen, and kind of an overall tan, hairy appearance. Darker bees are probably Germans. Carniolans are different species. Down here in sub-Saharan Africa is where the African killer bees, the ones that got so much attention in the 80s and 90s, originated. They were brought into Brazil in 1957. The queens escaped, and they rapidly made their way to the United States. The first incursion was in Texas in 1990, and they're still prolific. Their genetics are still prolific in the southern, more temperate states. So I'm going to go on to the biological imperatives. These are innate requirements that perpetuate the species and are always present regardless of any sort of environmental conditions. There are three castes in a honeybee superorganism. The queen is, and each of these castes have their own jobs to do. The queen and the drone have the same jobs, they never change. I'll talk about the worker in a minute, but a queen's job is to reproduce and to begin laying eggs. She will lay, in the spring and summer, she will lay 15 to 2,000 eggs a day. She's the largest individual in the colony, and there's only one queen per colony. If there happens to be two queens, they will fight until one wins, the other dies, and the winner becomes the mother of the colony. The drone, his only task is to reproduce and to mate with virgin queens. They're built for speed. They're stocky. They have their wing muscles are much more stout than worker bees. Their eyes really cover their head. They have literally a 365 view, and all of this is meant to aid in mating with the queen. Mating has to take place in flight. So the drone has got to catch a queen and mate with her. The drone does no other work. The drone goes, when resting, will go back to the hive and eat and rest. Now, if you think that this sounds like a great job, that all you do is mate and eat and rest, I should tell you that the act of mating instantly kills the drone, and they fall to earth dead. And if they're not dead by the end of the season, all the other worker bees, they drag them out of the nest, and the remaining drones freeze to death so that they don't take up any more resources. The worker is a little bit different. The worker bees perform all non-reproductive tasks. Under normal circumstances, a worker bee, although she is a female, cannot reproduce. She forages for food. She has a very short lifespan, about 45 days. Now, you'll see diploid, haploid, diploid. This has to do with the genetics of the honeybee. The diploid, as you know, in human beings, we inherit a pair of chromosomes. We inherit chromosomes from our mother and chromosomes from our father. This is not the case in honeybees or any insect in the Hymenoptera order. The queen, when she mates, she separates the female egg from the male sperm, and when she deposits an egg, she decides if that egg is going to be fertilized or unfertilized. If the egg is unfertilized, that's a drone. So he only has one set of chromosomes. He has no father. He only has a grandfather. This will show you the pictures of the chromosomes. In some cases, the workers can, under extreme stress, can lay eggs. They can't mate, but those eggs will birth a drone, and those drones will die soon if they are birthed by a worker bee. There's a reason biologically that this happens that I'll explain in a minute. This is the key to the superorganism, the honeybee superorganism. This is the sociality continuum of bees, and at the solitary end, we have bees that do not live in a hive. They have their own nest. Here's some examples: mason bees, leaf cutters, sweat bees. They may live communally, and there may be many separate nests with one entrance, like an apartment building, but they are essentially solitary bees. Bumblebees have some sociality. They have a colony. They're workers. They raise workers. They gather something similar to honey, but only honeybees are what are called eusocial, truly social. And that is, you can see at the bottom there, the traits of a eusocial organism is they have cooperative brood care. So everybody takes care of the brood. All the workers take care of the brood. There are overlapping generations. So births and deaths are continually occurring through the season, except during the winter. And there is this reproductive division of labor. The female worker bees, they do not reproduce under normal circumstances. Only the queen reproduces. This equals a perennial colony. So a honeybee colony, unlike all the others, can live year after year. The individuals will be short-lived, and the bumblebees and mason bees and leaf cutter bees, everyone dies except the queens that are hibernating that were produced in the current season. So the current colony dies. Same way with bumblebees. Their mated queens will burrow into the ground and hibernate until the next season when they come out and the cycle starts again. This is not true with honeybees. You can see YouTube videos of people that have gone and found beehives in their grandfather's farm that have been there 40 years. Of course, the individuals die, but the colony remains. And this is strictly unique to honeybees in the bee world. Now, this caused Charles Darwin a world of trouble because this eusociality and this altruism, when everything that he was preaching in Origin of the Species, he in fact, some people believe he waited 30 years to try to figure out the honeybee before he published Origin of the Species in 1859. And he kind of copped out and he said, well, we don't know what we don't know, but we'll figure it out someday. And sure enough, in 1964, a brilliant behavioralist, this W.D. Hamilton, he came up with this theory of social behavior, and it had to do with the genetics that I explained a while ago. And I'll give you don't try to do the math on this, it'll just give you a headache. So you kind of have to take my word for it. What happens is bees have 16 chromosomes. I've only used 4 here for clarity. So when a drone with only one set of chromosomes mates with a queen, that mating can produce either workers, or if the queen decides, she will only lay drones. But if the workers are born of a single father, then they are called super sisters, and they share 75% of their genes. Human beings, we only share 50% of our genes with our brothers and sisters. And like I say, if you want to work the math out with this, it is very tedious, but just please take my word for it. It works out. The result is this relatedness. The theory is that this extreme relatedness of 75% causes this altruism and unity in the hive. If the queen mates with, say, 10 drones, which she mates with multiple drones to avoid inbreeding, then there will be 10 subfamilies of sisters that are 75% related. And the theory is, again, that this relatedness leads to this altruism that leads to the existence and the ongoing being of the superorganism. So there is another biological, I mentioned before that every citizen has a job. The workers are a little different than the queens and the drones, and that the workers adhere to a principle called temporal polytheism. And that is, it's a fancy word, but it really means time-based division of labor. Unlike ants, army ants say, with their guards, they are born into a caste, born into a role, and they stay in that role the whole life. They will have large mandibles and larger legs. That is not true for a honeybee. Their division of labor is based on the age of the honeybee once she emerges from a cell. So you can see here kind of a summary. The first task out of the cell, the new honeybee stays in the center of the hive and cleans out the honeycomb. She cleans out all the trash. She cleans out the feces of other bees. She passes this garbage to other bees who leave the hive and dump it out of the hive. She also feeds larvae. Unlike other bees, larvae, I'll show you a picture of this. Larvae for a honeybee has to get fed continually and to develop correctly. And a nurse bee, a young bee will bring food and check on a larva sometimes 100 times a day until that larva is capped and the pupa begins to form. In the first and second week, the honeybees will go and they will receive food from the foragers, bringing it in from the outside. They will place this, if it's nectar, they will place it into a cell in the honeycomb, and the process of making honey can begin. Same thing with pollen. they will begin the process of making bee bread or food for larvae. Between the second and third week, the honeybee, the worker bee, is moving toward the outside of the hive. She may be a guard bee. She may remove the corpses from the bees that have died overnight. It's always interesting to go out in the early morning. You can see these corpses being removed and taken away from the hive, where they're dropped a distance from the hive. Some entomologists think that's to prevent ants from coming to the hive to feed on the dead bees. Last but not least is at the end of her life, she becomes a forager, and she will leave the hive looking for nectar, pollen, water, propolis, which is sap and resin from trees, and in some cases honeydew, which is a byproduct of aphids that is sweet. And they will search for honeydew if there's no nectar available. But as you can see, there may be 30,000 bees in a hive in June, but only about a third of these will leave the hive to go at any one time to go forage for resources for the hive. At 5 to 7 weeks during the season, the spring and summer season, the worker will die, and she will usually, if she can, die away from the hive. This foraging is a very dangerous endeavor. They can be eaten by birds or caught in a rainstorm, but you can always tell a old bee because her hair will be worn away and her wings may be damaged, and they have a very distinct look, almost like they're tired, which I guess they should be. Bees, I'm going to talk a little bit about how they reproduce. They reproduce in two ways: the sexual reproduction, called polyandry, and this means the female has multiple mates. It's the usual, what you learned in health class, but the unusual thing is they do not mate inside the hive. And if they mated inside the hive, they would be mating with their brothers that would lead to dangerous inbreeding. So the virgin queen must leave the hive to mate. Now this could be an entire all-day conference on learning about how they do it. It's very complicated, very interesting, but drones from hives all over the area will meet at these places high up in the air called drone congregation areas. And how they get there, no one is quite sure, but these drone congregation areas, they last they're the same from year to year. And so what you see in the picture there is you see a bunch of drones chasing a cloth on a string that's been impregnated with queen scent. They are fooled, and they begin chasing her in an attempt to mate. The mating occurs in flight. It's totally pheromone driven. Talk about pheromones in a minute. The drones emit a pheromone to find the drone congregation area. The queen emits a pheromone, a scent saying, "I'm here, I'm ready to mate." And they form a comet, they call it, to chase this queen and try to mate with her. And she will continue making flights until this organ inside her that holds the male sperm is filled. And when that is filled, she will not make it anymore. She will stay in the hive and not make any more flights. She will only leave the hive under one condition, which I'll talk about next. The second way that the honeybee reproduces is asexual, and it's called the swarm, and you've probably heard that. I probably get 15 or 20 calls in the spring about people telling me, "Well, I have a honeybee nest that's taken up a nest in my tree." What you're probably seeing is a swarm, and this is sort of how it works. The hive, people believe, the scientists believe that crowding in the hive really initiates the swarm, that the hive becomes very successful, and this will the hive's resources can't support the growing number of bees, and so there is there is a move by the bees to create another colony, another superorganism or hive. Uh, they prepare. It's very interesting. They prepare to swarm in several ways. The queen is going to leave with the swarm, so they exercise. She stops laying a lot of eggs, but they start to exercise her because she's not used to flying. So they will run her around, and she'll get very skinny. And from a beekeeper's perspective, she's very hard to see, to spot in this state. But what she will do is she will lay eggs in special cells. I've got them circled in red at the bottom. I'll talk about them in a minute. She will lay a few eggs in these cells that will become the new queen of the hive. When it's time to leave, about 3/4 of the workers and the mother queen leaves the hive. And so what you see called bivouac is a swarm of bees that was under a picnic table in my yard 2 years ago. And there's a bunch of bees there, look like a basketball. In the middle of that ball is a queen. They've got to keep her warm and protected, or her sperm will not be viable and she will not be able to lay viable eggs. Beekeepers love these swarms. They're easy to catch. You just knock them into a barrel and you've got free bees and free queen. But these bivouacs will stay, they could stay an hour, they could stay 3 hours, they could stay a couple of days. But what is happening is, and this is the most interesting part, there are a set of scout bees, maybe a dozen scout bees going on in all directions, looking for a new home, a new colony, a new hive for them to inhabit. Periodically, these scout bees come back and they literally vote on places they have seen until they narrow the possibilities down to the most attractive. That is, they prefer a feral hive that's at least 10 to 15 feet off the ground with a south-facing entrance that holds about 10 gallons. So when the scout bees agree that they found on the place that they're going, then all the bees in the bivouac will fly to that location and begin building a new colony. This is very, very high risk deal because they have got to prepare enough resources in the short time that they have left before winter sets in, so they can survive the winter. Back in the old hive, these queen cells, they will hatch. The first queen out usually kills the rest of the queen. She'll sting. Her stinger does not have a barb. She will sting the queen through the cells, the wax cells, and then she will go out and try to get mated. So what you see at the bottom there and with the circles, those are queen or swarm cells. The queen is born upside down. And so there, when a bee, this is one of my hives this year. When a beekeeper sees these swarm cells, there's really not much you can do about it. They've decided to swarm. No matter what you do, they're going to be gone. And when I found these cells, they had already been opened. I knew that the bees had swarmed. I don't know where they went, but the population in the hive is reduced, and so the beekeeper gambles that the new queen can go out and successfully mate and come back and begin laying eggs. If she doesn't, the hive will die, the colony will die. I talk about the season that the honeybees go through. This affects how their processes work. I'm going to start with winter. In winter, the honeybees reduce their numbers to about 8,000 in a typical hive. They form a cluster that you can see there with those concentric circles. In the center of the cluster is the queen. They have to keep the queen warm up about 90 degrees Fahrenheit for her to remain viable, so she can lay viable eggs come springtime. On the outer edges, it gets to be about 70 degrees. Now, the way they do this is they have a very unique anatomical setup. They can detach their wing, the muscles that control their wings, they can detach their wings and they can twitch these muscles. And they twitch, this 8,000 bees are continually twitching to generate this warmth. And you could go out into a hive in the dead of winter, and you can put your ear against the hive with no bees inside, and you can hear this great roar inside as they produce this heat. The bottom picture there is a thermal photograph of a hive. It shows you where the cluster is inside generating heat. This is a very carbohydrate intense activity. The bees have got to have food to support this activity, or they starve to death. One of the biggest killers of beekeepers' bees, especially new beekeepers, is they harvest too much honey and the bees have nothing to eat and they starve to death. In north where I live, my bees, it takes about 30 to 40 pounds of honey left in the hive for them to survive the winter. Up north, it can take 100 pounds of honey. It's very weather dependent. And so when we had this big freeze in February, everyone was worried that their bees were not going to come through. But they did. Most people's bees came through all right. The weak hives died probably, but most people were surprised how many lived through the winter. If warm days now and then, as you know, we get in Texas, we get a day over 50 degrees. You'll see bees leave the hive taking cleansing flights. They don't poop inside the hive. They can store an enormous amount of poop, feces in their abdomen. And the first chance they get, they'll leave and fly a short distance and relieve themselves. So inside the hive is very, very clean. In late winter and early spring, the queen begins to lay, and most beekeepers count beekeeping season to start in the winter solstice, because the plants begin to respond to the longer days and nights, and the blooms start appearing with dandelion and henbit, and the elm trees have pollen pods on them. So this spring buildup begins in earnest. And the goal is to raise enough mature bees that they mature and they can go out and forage, and they can bring in enough nectar and pollen that the winter bees can survive the winter and not starve to death. The queen is laying 1,000, 2,000 eggs a day very rapidly. There's these intense nutrition needs. The pollen in the upper photograph there are larvae, honeybee larvae that have to be fed every day with a high protein jelly. Once the larva gets large enough, the worker bees cap that with a thin wax cap. The bottom picture is me holding a frame, and each of those brown spots, you can see there's a pupating honeybee under there maturing. The wings are forming, the eyes are forming. They're no longer fed, but all the anatomy of the bee is forming under those brown caps. When they are chewed away, a mature bee emerges, ready to go to work. There's a very, very high starvation risk in spring as well. And a lot of, especially new beekeepers, their bees starve to death because they've eaten up all the honey. The pollen is not available yet, and there's just not enough to eat. So typically a beekeeper will feed their bees sugar water syrup during the spring until what's called the nectar flow of the wildflowers get started. Some of the very early plants we see are elm, willow, henbit, and dandelion. I'm sure there are others, but these are the source of protein that the larva must have to survive. So I want to show you what it looks like in the early spring when the bees begin bringing in the pollen. What you'll see here is a video in front of one of my hives. As I told you before, the bees have a pollen basket on the upper part of their tibia, their back leg, where they store the pollen that they bring in from the flowers. And so what you'll see are these bees bringing in pollen to the hive because the hive is gearing up. The queen is beginning to lay this 1,000, 2,000 eggs a day, and the larvae have got to be fed a protein-based jelly that can only be made out of pollen. So take a look. You'll see cream-colored pollen, which I believe is coming from a wingbark elm that I see down here on the Brazos River. If you look closely, you'll see a bee bringing in some red pollen. That's henbit pollen, and you'll see some kind of Cheeto orange colored, that's dandelion pollen. So take a look. There's the red pollen. Here comes the orange pollen. So this will go on hour after hour in the early spring, which is a healthy sign. Excuse me. Grab some water. In the spring and summer, the bees, the population in the colony will be at peak, and they will begin to regulate the protein that they need. Honeybees will regulate protein and not bring in more than they need, but they will not regulate the harvesting of nectar, which turns into honey. They will be in the hive curing honey. They will be foraging continually, looking for resources. This is when the swarm season starts that I talked about. They will rob each other. You will often see hives being attacked by other bees that are trying to kill the guard bees, get into the hive, rip open the cells, and steal the honey and the pollen. Water requirements, especially in Texas, are very high during this period. They use the water obviously to drink it, but they also use water for thermal regulation of the temperature in the hive that I'll talk about later. And the queen starts her laying starts slowing down. The picture at the bottom, if you've never seen it, is capped honey. All that, the white are airtight caps over little cells filled with honey. And so when we harvest the honey, we break those caps and drain the honey out of the open cells. In the fall, this is when they're getting ready for winter. Laying stops sometimes. The numbers become greatly reduced. A new sort of type of bee is born. Winter bees. They have more fat. They're bigger bees, and their goal is going to be they don't go out and forage obviously until the end of the winter. They may go out some, but they stay inside the hive generating heat. They live longer because they don't go outside the hive where it's very dangerous. They evict the drones. That you can see this bee here is carrying dragging a drone out of the hive. This is my wife's favorite time of year. She loves to put on her bee suit and go out and watch the worker bees kick the males out of the hive. The winter cluster forms that I talked about before, and winter begins, and they're continually generating heat to keep the hive alive. So now I want to talk about the processes of the superorganism. The processes are different from the biological imperative in that the processes can differ depending on the environment, depending on different conditions. So I'm going to talk about these. These are not all of the processes, but these are the major ones. Pheromones are the backbone of the communication system inside the beehives. In 2006, the honeybee genome was sequenced at the Baylor College of Medicine with drones because they had fewer chromosomes, and they found they were really surprised how many chemical and odor receptors that they found in the honeybee. There were nearly 2 times as many of these receptors as their nearest insect relatives. And these are the receptors used to detect the pheromones or scents that the honeybees emit. The honeybees had very, very few. Another surprise, they had very few taste receptors. They don't taste anything because they only eat honey and bee bread and jelly. So they don't need to know if something is poison or not. So that they have an intense sense of smell, but not a very good taste. And as the quote down there, the pheromones rule almost every aspect of the honeybee's life. In the honeybee, there are 2 types of pheromones. There's primer and releaser. The primer pheromone is longer acting, and it can actually trigger biological changes in development and behavior. For example, the presence of the queen pheromone really suppresses the development of the worker reproductive organs. If the queen pheromone is present, the workers will not raise a new queen. If there's no queen in the hive, the workers will begin raising a new queen that will be making their own new queen. But if that pheromone is present, that they will not do that. It also regulates worker activity. The releaser pheromone is the weaker type. It's very short term. It's behavioral, causes a certain behavior. Examples are orientation. If you go to a beehive, you can see bees on the outside of the hive sticking their little abdomens up in the air. There's a gland in there called the Nasonoff gland. They are fanning this smell out so that the foragers can easily find their home. If there is a threat to the hive, they will emit an alarm pheromone. And old beekeepers will tell you that it smells exactly like bananas. And when you go out there and you pop the top of your hive and you smell bananas, they're going to be mad that day. They will also put a little spot of pheromone on if they sting to make a target for their other bees that have been alerted to sting at that spot. So you'll see beekeepers smoking their gloves and smoking their face to mask any sting pheromone that the bees may have tried to leave in their gloves or on their jackets. So pheromones are really the backbone of all communications. Okay, the second is the dance, and I'm going to try to do this now. And if it doesn't work, I'll not do it. I hope you can see this. Watch the bee with the dot on her back. She's doing the waggle dance. I hope you could all see that.
Kurt, it did come through fine.
Okay, that's the waggle dance. Actually, people have known about the waggle dance for thousands of years. Aristotle knew that the waggle dance occurred. He didn't know what it meant. In the 1950s, this German behavioral entomologist named Karl von Fritz interpreted the waggle dance and won the Nobel Prize. The waggle dance is communicating where food sources are and recruiting foragers. And the way it works is pretty amazing. The dancer bee uses the position of the sun and the angle from the sun, the angle where the food is from the sun to tell the other bees where to go to get food. The waggle dance communicates position of the food, distance. The little waggle, if for every second of the waggle equals 1 kilometer, and the type of resources that are out there. If the honeybee dancing has pollen in her pollen baskets, there's pollen there. If she smells of nectar, then it's nectar there. And since the discovery of this dance, the interpretation of this dance, several other dance types have been interpreted. They include just a round dance where there's no waggle. This means food is very close by, less than 100 meters. That can signal that there's danger at a previously site that was danced. Don't go there. Stop going there. There's a predator there. The beekeeper's there doing something, but the bees can tell their compatriots not to go to a previously advertised source of food. And I mentioned the scouts when they voted, when they were in the bivouac of the swarm. The scouts used a special dance to vote on where new locations will be, the new hive will be. I talk a little bit about food production. I'll talk about just 2 types of food. One is bee bread, which is pollen based. People say, well, the bees eat pollen. Bees do not eat pollen. Bees use pollen as an ingredient to make another source of food. It's called bee bread, which they ultimately turned into royal and worker jelly. It was believed for a long time that the way the way honeybees would make their own queen is they would just feed that larva. They would only feed it royal jelly, which is much higher in proteins and enzymes. If anything is fed that through the larval stage, it will turn into a queen. Not so with the worker. They are fed jelly that is has less protein in it. But pollen is the source of this protein. And without protein and adequate pollen sources, the young cannot be raised and the hive will die. Pollen is not created equal. If you want to plant a bunch of wildflowers, be sure to plant a wide variety. There's a large gap. Pollen can range from 4% to about 20% in protein, and it's the protein that the larva needs. The mature bees also need protein, and they eat the bee bread, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. But from the glands inside the bees, they, in addition to the pollen, they add other ingredients. They add some nectar, they add enzymes, nutrients, and this bee bread will ferment. But it will, unlike honey, it will not be capped. Let me show you what that looks like. This is another thing beekeepers love. On the bee bread up there, you can see the different colors of pollen that have been gathered. So it's this beautiful mosaic when the sun shines on it. When you take one of those frames out and look at it, if you cut a cross section, you can see where the bees have taken the pollen from their pollen baskets after workers, nurse bees have chewed it up, and they use their heads to compact it inside a cell in the honeycomb. And when they get ready to feed the larva, a nurse bee will eat some of this bee bread. In her crop, she will add enzymes. It will turn into a jelly, and that's what they feed to the larva. I want to talk about honey. It also is a chemical process. Bees, as a rule, they eat nectar, not honey, although some nectar is eaten. I'm always asked, especially if I'm giving a talk to people with, I don't want to sound harsh here, with teenage boys in it, so they don't eat honey because it's bee vomit. Honey is not bee vomit, and I'll tell you why. It has to do with the anatomy of the bee's digestive system. It's in three parts. There's a foregut, a midgut, and a hindgut. The hindgut makes poop. The midgut is where digestion takes place. The foregut, which you can see a picture there on the right, has a crop, a clear bubble. And when a honeybee collects nectar, that nectar goes into the crop. That crop, if she needs nutrition, there is a valve called the proventriculus that she will release a little honey, a little nectar that go down into her digestive system, and it will be digested and the nutrients will be distributed. Otherwise, the only thing that she does with the nectar that's left in the crop is take it back to the hive. She does not vomit anything up. That is stored in a very clean environment. She takes it back to the hive, and the honey making process can begin. However, for many years, thousands of years actually, people believe that honey was made outside the bee's body. This is the basis of kosher, of honey being declared a kosher food, while the honeybee is a non-kosher creature. It's the only kosher food coming from a non-kosher creature. But this was wrong. It turned out when modern science, the honey making process actually begins inside the honeybee's crop, not outside the honeybee's body. Here's how it works. The nectar is collected from flowers with these nectaries that bribe honeybees to come and get it, and then at the same time get pollen and go to another flower and pollinate that flower. But the nectar that comes out of a flower is a sugar, sucrose. It's a complex sugar, sucrose. It's just almost like if you dissolve granulated sugar in water. Inside the crop, or the honeybee's crop, she adds a enzyme called invertase, and this breaks the sucrose molecule into glucose and fructose. This is why honey is a simple syrup. It's easier for human beings to digest than refined sugar. Other enzymes are added. Honey is really acidic. You can't taste the acid because it's sweet, and it's got a level of hydrogen peroxide in it that makes it antimicrobial. So this all takes place in the honeybee's crop. When she gets back to the hive, she passes this nectar, this nectar that she's treated with the enzymes, back to a house bee with a process called trophallaxis. This is mouth-to-mouth transfer of the nectar. More enzymes are added. The pH is regulated. The acidity is regulated. But the most important part is the water removal begins. When it gets back to the beehive, there's a high level of water. If it was stored like this, it would rot and ferment before the winter. So the bees have got to remove a good portion of water out of the honey. They do this by several ways. They bubble it. They'll literally stick their heads and bubble this nectar until the water content is less than 17% with the acidity of the pH is where they want it. When all this happens, then they put a wax cap on each cell. There is a chemical reason they do this, and that is because of the interaction between glucose and warm water. You can actually store more calories if you break the sugar down, it turns out, in the cell. So the honeybees have figured out over 30 million years that they can break the sugar down and store more calories, which they're going to need in the winter. And this is what you're eating when you eat honey. If you're eating real honey, you will eat, the water content will be less than 17%. We beekeepers, we take out a handheld refractometer when we harvest honey to make sure the water level is right. We don't harvest it if it's too high. And then only then will we harvest it. So it's a fascinating process that you could spend hours with the chemistry, what these creatures do. This is what's in your honey. It's mostly fructose and glucose. There are some enzymes in there, but this is what true honey should be. This is probably not what you're getting if you're buying your honey at big box stores. You're probably getting a lot of diluted honey with fructose or other syrups, rice syrups. Uh, Getting to the end here, beeswax. Beeswax is not bee poop, as some people have told me. They have glands on the underside of their abdomen. They produce these scales that are taken by the house bees and then shaped. Making this wax is extremely expensive when it comes to the resources they need. They need lots of honey to make beeswax. This is a kind of an out of focus picture of a worker exuding wax, these wax scales from these glands on the underside of her abdomen. I think this is the last thing. The propolis is this sticky goo that glues everything together, and it's made from resins and sap of trees. This is if there are cracks where air gets in, or there's a dangerous opening that may let robbers in. They will fill this with this propolis that dries to a rock hard cement. In that they collect it just like they did. They bring it back, this gooey stuff, in their pollen baskets. It's very interesting. The bottom picture, if they find, in some cases, especially during the winter, a mouse or a larger creature will get into the hive that they cannot carry out. In those cases, they will cover it. This is a mouse that's been it's been mummified with this propolis. It's airtight, it keeps the germs in. When I started beekeeping, the practice was that you removed all the propolis from your hive. You took your hive tool and you scraped all this stuff away. All that has changed in the last 2 years. It's been discovered that the propolis is antimicrobial. And so you want to leave the propolis in the hive. In fact, beekeepers now are figuring out ways to encourage bees to put more propolis in the hive because it protects against certain viruses and illnesses. Thermoregulation is very interesting. They've got to keep the hive at a constant temperature, pretty constant temperature range. And when you think about winter and summer, this is really an amazing process. For heating and cooling, they use this propolis to seal any cracks where air could escape. I talked about the clustering and these slight muscles that generate all this heat. For cooling, they fan their wings, but they use a method of evaporative cooling, just like an old swamp cooler. They will bring in, they don't store water inside the hive, but they will coat the honeycomb with hive or keep a drop of hive in their mandible, and then they will fan this to create an evaporative cooling effect. However, and sometimes it gets so humid, this doesn't work. So when that doesn't work, when you see something like this, the bees will, new beekeepers, this kind of freaks them out sometimes. The new beekeepers will see this, the bees come out of the hive and they'll stay on the face of the hive until it gets cool. They will just move individuals out of the hive, so heating is not so difficult. The queen will stay in the hive all the time. So this is something we're starting to see now as the temperature really heats up, and especially on those days where it's humid. There's some other processes I didn't talk about. I talked a little bit about sanitation. They groom each other. The mortuary services. A varroa is a mite that's killing bees, and bee breeders are breeding bees that will sense if another bee is infected with a mite, they'll take that bee out of the colony. Defense and guarding is a complex processes when the hive is threatened. And I want to mention that even that during a honeybee's life, if there is stress on the hive, that she can revert to some of her earlier roles. So an older bee can go back to being a nurse bee under conditions of stress. And I think that's the end. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, if I can.
Don't be shy, folks. If you